In Touch with Dr. Charles Stanley, celebrating 45 years of God's faithfulness. Next on In Touch, the supreme moment in human history.
What is the supreme moment in human history? Well, if you were to ask people that, for example, if you were to ask a historian or a philosopher or a scientist, probably all of them would give you something different. In fact, if you ask most any person, what is the supreme moment in all of human history, you'd get 1,000 or more different answers. But if you and I were to ask God that question, I think the answer would come very clear, very quickly. Because I do believe that from God's perspective, the supreme moment in human history was the moment His Son, Jesus Christ, was crucified. Now, a lot of people disagree with that. They just have to disagree with God. And I can understand why, rationally speaking, and from a different perspective, somebody would say, well, that certainly was not the supreme moment of human history, because this was just one man dying between two thieves, two criminals. Well, you see, the reason the person would object to that answer is simply because they don't understand what happened at the cross. In fact, most people don't really understand what happened at the cross. They look at the cross and they see Jesus hanging there, having been nailed there, and having been crowned with thorns, and finally pierced in His side. And they see all the events surrounding the cross, and they say, well, you know, Jesus died for my sins, or Jesus died on the cross. What they don't realize is that the most important things that were going on that day, you and I never really understand by simply looking at a scene. So what I'd like to do is to show you why the most momentous, supreme, zenith, pinnacle event in all of human history is the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. And I want you to turn, if you will, to Luke chapter 24. And this is a passage that really does not describe the crucifixion, but it's a passage I'm going to read because of one particular verse here. And it's almost humorous in some sense of the word, but sort of sad on the other. And Jesus has been crucified and resurrected from the dead, and now here are a couple of His followers on their way. And in this 24th chapter of Luke, beginning in verse 13, here's what you read. And behold, two of them were going that very day to a village named Emmaus, which was about 7 miles from Jerusalem. And they were talking with each other about the things which had taken place. And while they were talking and discussing, Jesus Himself approached and began traveling with them. But their eyes were prevented from recognizing Him. And He said to them, what are these words that you're exchanging with one another as you're walking? And they stood still, looking sad. One of them, named Cleopas, answered and said to Him, are you the only one visiting Jerusalem and unaware of the things which have happened here in these days? Now, when I read that, and I've read this verse many, many times, when I read this verse, I just sort of fell on my knees in laughter. And I'll tell you why. He was the only one who knew what was going on that day. And they asked Him, are you the only one visiting Jerusalem and unaware of the things which have happened here in these days? And He was the only one who knew what happened the day He was crucified. And He said to them, what things? And they said to Him, the things about Jesus the Nazarene, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word in the sight of God and all the people. And how the chief priests and our rulers delivered Him up to the sentence of death and crucified Him. But we were hoping that it was He who was going to redeem Israel. Indeed, besides all this, it's the third day since these things have happened. But also some women among us amazed us when they were at the tomb early in the morning and did not find His body. They came saying that they had also seen a vision of angels who said He was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just exactly as the women had also said, but Him they did not see. And He said to them, O foolish men and slow of heart to believe in all the prophets have spoken, was it not necessary for Christ to suffer these things and to enter His glory? Now, if somebody should ask you, what happened the day Jesus Christ was crucified? What happened at the cross? The first thing is simply this, and that is God judged sin the day Jesus Christ was crucified. When Jesus Christ was crucified, God judged sin. This he prophesied all the way back in the Garden of Eden when he said to Adam and Eve, of all the trees of the garden you're freely to eat, but if you eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, ye shall surely die. Then if you'll recall, all through the Scriptures, God warns us about sin. He says the soul that sins will die. In Romans, that first chapter, he makes it very clear in the 18th verse. He says that the wrath of God, God's animosity toward, his uncompromising hatred of sin, God's wrath is revealed from heaven against all unrighteousness of men who hold or suppress the truth of God in unrighteousness. God hates sin. When we say that God judged sin, God did exactly that. Because all through the Scriptures we find God expressing his vehement opposition to all sin. For the simple reason he knows its destructive power in a person's life. All you have to do is look at a newspaper, look at a magazine, watch the television, listen to the radio, and you and I see the awesome consequences of sin in people's lives every single day. God judged sin at the cross. When we say that God judged sin on the cross, here's what that means. He says that Jesus Christ bore our sin in his body, which simply means that, listen, watch this, that God capsuled all the sin of mankind from Adam all the way back from Adam all the way to the last person who will ever live. He capsuled all of that sin with all of its penalty. And what did he do? He placed every bit of that upon the person of Jesus Christ, his only begotten Son. He placed all of that sin upon him. And then when he placed all of that sin upon him, what did he do? He killed his only begotten Son, and he killed him and separated himself from him as a sinner. He placed all of our sin upon him. He bore the total weight of all of our sin, all of our guilt. Any one of us could come up with enough sin in our lives over these years that our sin would be enough. But multiply that by hundreds and thousands and millions and billions of times. God placed upon his only begotten Son, listen, the sum total. He capsuled all of sin and placed it upon the life, upon the body of his only begotten Son, and then he condemned him.